Today we're talking about illustration licenses. The illustration industry works on the basis that illustrators grant licenses to their clients. So those clients can use the artwork for a particular purpose in a specific location for a certain amount of time. The artist owns the copyright and is giving their client permission to use the work in exchange for a fee. That's how stock libraries work. It's the same for photographers. Musicians are paid a royalty when their music is licensed for a TV advert, for example. If I wanted to put some music in this video, I'd have to pay a license fee. Every job you take on should have a defined license agreed with the client up front, because the variables in that license will affect how you price the work. And when you price in an illustration, a portion of that is going to be the production cost. That's how long it takes you to make and how complicated it is to make. But the rest is going to be the fee for the license. You could make one illustration for one issue of a magazine for £1,000, for example. But if that same illustration was created for a nationwide advertising campaign, it could cost £10,000. The production cost is the same, but the scope of the license is way bigger. As a general rule of thumb, the more people that are going to see the work, the higher the price should be. A magazine with a bigger readership should, in theory, pay more than a small magazine. A quarterly magazine should pay more than a weekly magazine because they're using it for longer and more people are going to see it. A nationwide advertising campaign will pay more than an advertising campaign that's limited to a small region. Licenses can become very complicated, but I'm going to break it down here into three main parts. Usage, that's the what, territory, that's the where, and duration, that's the when or how long. Usage. Most of the time, a client will tell you what the illustration will be used for, whether it's a book cover or a newspaper or packaging, because you need to know that to do the job. But it's not always clear, and there are often multiple uses for the same illustration. You need that complete list from the client to price accurately. If the illustration is only for a magazine cover, that's a relatively small usage. But if that same illustration is going to be used for packaging, marketing materials, point of sale items and print adverts and on social media, that's quite a lot. Sometimes a client will want to extend their license later down the line. And if you've agreed to a fee for a specific purpose and the client wants to use it for something else down the line, they should offer you an additional fee. It could be an all media license. In that case, the client wants the flexibility to use the image on anything they want. Now that should be a bigger fee, and if you don't charge enough and then you see your design on t-shirts, billboards, magazines, you're not going to feel great about that. I'm going to link to a blog post in the description with some of the different usage terms that you might come across and what they mean. Territory. This is where your work is going to be used. Could be as small as one exact location for an event. Not many people are going to see that, but it could be global. Thousands of people could see it. A global brand like Nike might roll out an ad campaign all over the world, but an indie gin distillery might only be advertising in their local area. It could be a country. It could be a whole continent. Some territories are defined by language. Something could be rolled out in German-speaking countries, for example. Germany, Austria, Switzerland. I think that's it. Generally speaking, the bigger the territory, the higher the fee should be. But different countries have different economies. The UK is a small country, but they have good budgets. Brazil, for example, is a massive country, but they're going to have generally lower fees. The UK, the US, France, and Germany, they all have very good budgets generally. Canada and Australia tend to be a little bit lower. A UK magazine might have a counterpart in the US, GQ, for example. They have different versions of GQ in lots of different countries. The territory is larger in the US, so if they want to use your illustration in the UK version and in the US version, you can ask for a higher fee. Duration. How long is the client going to use your work for? An ad campaign could run for a year, or it could just run for a few weeks or days even. A weekly magazine will pay less than a quarterly magazine because the work has only been used for a week. A beer label might be a seasonal beer. It could only be for the Christmas season, but then you should ask yourself, is it only this Christmas, or is it Christmas every year? Some clients don't know how long they're going to use your work for. Imagine that gin distillery from earlier. They might buy ad space in their local magazine for 3 months, but if that goes well, they might want to extend that. The duration can be harder to define for books. A publisher doesn't necessarily know how long a book is going to be printed for. But if they print 10,000 books, that could take 6 years to sell or 6 months to sell. Now, in that case, the duration can be limited to the first edition. And if they sell out in 6 months, they're probably going to print more, but you should be offered an additional fee. The longer the duration, the higher the fee should be. When that time runs out, if they want to keep using the work, they should offer you an additional fee. Some clients don't know when usage will start, so you could have a 1-year license from first use, for example. Perpetual licenses, or licenses with no time limit, means the client wants the flexibility to use the illustration for as long as they want. It's quite common, it should be a higher fee, but if that license is also exclusive to that client, it means you can't ever resell the illustration. And since I mentioned exclusivity, it is another factor you should consider. A monthly magazine might have 90 days exclusivity, which is pretty standard in my experience. After that 90 days is up, you are free to relicense that illustration to another client. You wouldn't charge the same the second time because there's no production cost. But the great thing about licensing is you can continue to make money from the same image forever, potentially, if people want it. The example I just mentioned with the perpetual license, if it's exclusive to that client, they may or may not use it after 1 year, for example. But if they have the exclusive license to do so, you can't ever use it yourself or relicense it again. So if the client wants a perpetual license, you might try and negotiate an exclusivity period. A couple of years maybe. It's unlikely a brand is going to want to use the same image forever anyway. Even worse for you than an exclusive perpetual license would be an exclusive all media perpetual license. That means the client can use the work for whatever they want, for however long they want, and you can't ever use it again. And that amounts to the same as selling your copyright, which we'll look at in another video. You might technically be the copyright holder, but the client has complete control over your work. And needless to say, it should be an enormous fee for that kind of license. Finally, I want to stress the importance of getting licenses agreed early in the process before any creative work starts. Some combination of the factors we've discussed here will make up your license and guide your pricing. Get it in writing early, and then you and the client know exactly what the deal is. You could use a formal licensing agreement, but it really only has to be stated clearly in an email and agreed to by the client. Then you've always got proof if your work is used for anything that it's not supposed to be used for. You can just refer back to that email. When you get a contract, make sure it reflects the terms that you've agreed to in this license discussion. Some contracts have standard terms in them, and the person sending you the contract might not know specifically what's been agreed to, so it's your job to check that it matches. Here's an example license. It doesn't have to be anything more complicated than writing this in an email and asking the client to agree to it. You've defined the usage and the territory and the duration of the license. It specifically names the client, so there's no ambiguity about that, and it also states what the exclusivity terms are. Hope this has been helpful. Any comments or questions, let me know. A couple more videos here. See you next time.